Chapter 7. Fauchelevent becomes a gardener in Paris. Some time afterward, Monsieur Madeleine was appointed mayor. The first time that Javert beheld Monsieur Madeleine clothed in the scarf which gave him authority over the town, he felt the sort of shudder which a watchdog might experience on smelling a wolf in his master's clothes. From that time forth he avoided him as much as he possibly could. When the requirements of the service imperatively demanded it, and he could do naught otherwise than to meet the mayor, he addressed him with profound respect. This prosperity created at Montreuil-sur-Mer by Father Madeleine had, besides the visible signs which we have mentioned, another symptom, which was none the less significant for not being visible. This never deceives. When the population suffers, when the work is lacking, when there is no commerce, the taxpayer resists imposits through penury, he exhausts and oversteps his respite, and the state expends a great deal of money in his charges for compelling and collection. When work is abundant, when the country is rich and happy, the taxes are paid easily and cost the state nothing. It may be said that there is one infallible thermometer of the public misery and riches, the cost of collecting the taxes. In the course of 7 years, the expense of collecting the taxes had diminished 3/4 in the arrondissement of Montreuil-sur-Mer, and this led to this arrondissement being frequently cited from all the rest by Monsieur de Villèle, then Minister of Finance. Such was the condition of the country when Fantine returned thither. No one remembered her. Fortunately, the door of Monsieur Madeleine's factory was like the face of a friend. She presented herself there, and was admitted to the women's workroom. The trade was entirely new to Fantine. She could not be very skilful at it, and she therefore earned little by her day's work. But it was sufficient. The problem was solved. She was earning her living. Chapter 8. Madame Victurnien expends 30 francs on morality. When Fantine saw that she was making her living, she felt joyful for a moment. To live honestly by her own labor, what mercy from heaven! The taste for work had really returned to her. She bought a looking-glass, took pleasure in surveying in it her youth, her beautiful hair, her fine teeth. She forgot many things. She thought only of Cosette and of the possible future, and was almost happy. She hired a little room and furnished on credit on the strength of her future work, a lingering trace of her improvident ways. As she was not able to say that she was married, she took good care, as we have seen, not to mention her little girl. At first, as the reader has seen, she paid the Thénardiers promptly. As she only knew how to sign her name, she was obliged to write through a public letter-writer. She wrote often, and this was noticed. It began to be said in an undertone in the women's workroom that Fantine wrote letters, and that she had ways about her. There is no one for spying on people's actions like those who are not concerned in them. Why does that gentleman never come in except nightfall? Why does Mr. So-and-so never hang his key on its nail on Tuesday? Why does he always take the narrow streets? Why does Madame always descend from her hackney coach before reaching her house? Why does she send out to purchase 6 sheets of note-paper when she has a whole stationer's shop full of it? Etc. There are beings who, for the sake of obtaining the key to these enigmas, which are, moreover, no consequence whatever to them, spend more money, waste more time, take more trouble than would be required for 10 good actions, and that gratuitously, for their own pleasure, without receiving any other payment for their curiosity than curiosity. They will follow up such and such a man or woman for whole days. They will do sentry duty for hours at a time on the corners of the street, under alleyway doors at night, in cold and rain. They will bribe errand porters. They will make drivers of the hackney coaches and lackeys tipsy. Buy a waiting-maid, suborn a porter. Why? For no reason. A pure passion for seeing, knowing, and penetrating into things. A pure itch for talking. And often these secrets once known, these mysteries made public, these enigmas illuminated by the light of day, bring on catastrophes, duels, failures, and ruin of families, and broken lives, to the great joy of those who have found out everything, without any interest in the matter, and by pure instinct. A sad thing. Certain persons are malicious solely through a necessity for talking. Their conversation, the chat of the drawing-room, gossip of the ante-room, is like those chimneys which consume wood rapidly. They need a great amount of combustibles, and their combustibles are furnished by their neighbors. So Fantine was watched. In addition, many a one was jealous of her golden hair and her white teeth. It was remarked that in the workroom she often turned aside in the midst of the rest to wipe away a tear. These were the moments when she was thinking of her child, perhaps also of the man whom she had loved. Breaking the gloomy bonds of the past is a mournful task. It was observed that she wrote twice a month at least, and that she paid the carriage on the letter. They managed to obtain the address, Monsieur and Madame Thénardier, innkeeper at Montfermeil. The public writer, a good old man who could not fill his stomach with red wine without emptying his pockets of secrets, was made to talk in the wine shop. In short, it was discovered that Fantine had a child. She must be a pretty sort of woman. An old gossip was found, who made the trip to Montfermeil, talked to the Thénardiers, and said on her return, "For my 35 francs I have freed my mind. I have seen the child." The gossip who did this thing was a Gorgon named Madame Victurnien, the guardian and doorkeeper of everyone's virtue. Madame Victurnien was 56, and reinforced the mask of ugliness with the mask of age. A quavering voice, a whimsical mind, this old dame had once been young, astonishing fact. In her youth, in '93, she had married a monk who had fled from his cloister in a red cap and passed from the Bernardines to the Jacobins. She was dry, rough, peevish, sharp, captious, almost venomous, all this in memory of her monk, whose widow she was, and who had ruled over her masterfully and bent her to his will. She was a nettle in which the rustle of the cassock was visible. At the Restoration she had turned bigot, and that with so much energy that the priests had forgiven her monk. She had a small property, which was bequeathed with much ostentation to a religious community. She was in high favour at the episcopal palace of Arras. So this Madame Victurnien went to Montfermeil, and returned with the remark, "I have seen the child." All this took time. Fantine had been at the factory for more than a year, when one morning the superintendent of the workroom handed her 50 francs from the mayor, told her that she was no longer employed in the shop, and requested her, in the mayor's name, to leave the neighbourhood. This was the very month when the Thénardiers, after having demanded 12 francs instead of 6, had just enacted 15 francs instead of 12. Fantine was overwhelmed. She could not leave the neighbourhood, she was in debt for her rent and furniture. 50 francs was not sufficient to cancel this debt. She stammered a few supplicating words. The superintendent ordered her to leave the shop on the instant. Besides, Fantine was only a moderately good workwoman. Overcome with shame, even more than with despair, she quitted the shop and returned to her room. So her fault was now known to everyone. She no longer felt strong enough to say a word. She was advised to see the mayor. She did not dare. The mayor had given her 50 francs because he was good, and had dismissed her because he was just. She bowed before the decision. Chapter 9. Madame Victurnien's Success. So the monk's widow was good for something. But Monsieur Madeleine had heard nothing of all this. Life is full of just such combinations of events. Monsieur Madeleine was in the habit of almost never entering the women's workroom. At the head of this room he had placed an elderly spinster, whom the priest had provided for him, and he had full confidence in this superintendent, a truly respectable person, firm, equitable, upright, full of the charity which consists in giving, but not having, in the same degree, that charity which consists in understanding and in forgiving. Monsieur Madeleine relied wholly on her. The best men are often obliged to delegate their authority. It was with this full power, and the conviction that she was doing right, that the superintendent had instituted the suit, judged, condemned, and executed Fantine. As regards the 50 francs, she had given them from a fund which Monsieur Madeleine had entrusted her for charitable purposes, and for giving assistance to the workwomen, and of which she rendered no account. Fantine tried to obtain a situation as a servant in the neighbourhood. She went from house to house. No one would have her. She could not leave town. The second-hand dealer to whom she was in debt for her furniture, and what furniture, said to her, "If you leave, I will have you arrested as a thief." The householder, whom she owed for her rent, said to her, "You are young and pretty. You can pay." She divided the 50 francs between the landlord and the furniture dealer, returned the latter 3/4 of his goods, kept only necessaries, and found herself without work, without a trade, with nothing but her bed, and still about 50 francs in debt. She began to make coarse shirts for soldiers of the garrison, and earned 12 sous a day. Her daughter cost her 10. It was at this point that she began to pay the Thénardiers regularly. However, the old woman who lighted her candle for her when she returned at night taught her the art of living in misery. Back of living on a little, there is living on nothing. These are the 2 chambers. The first is dark, the second is black. Fantine learned how to live without fire entirely in the winter, how to give up a bird which eats half a farthing's worth of millet every 2 days, how to make a coverlay of one's petticoat, and a petticoat of one's coverlay, how to save one's candle by taking one's meals by the light of the opposite window. No one knows all that certain feeble creatures who have grown old in privation and honesty can get out of a sou. It ends by being a talent. Fantine acquired this sublime talent. and regained a little courage. At this epoch she said to her neighbor, "Bah! I say to myself, by only sleeping 5 hours and working all the rest of my time at sewing, I shall always manage to nearly earn my bread. And then, when one is sad, one eats less. Well, sufferings, uneasiness, a little bread on one hand, trouble on the other, all this will support me." It would have been a great happiness to have her little girl with her in this distress. She thought of having her come. But what then? Make her share her own destitution? And then she was in debt to the Thénardiers. How could she pay them? And the journey? How pay for that? The old woman who had given her lessons in what might be called the life of indigence was a sainted spinster named Marguerite, who was pious with a true piety, poor and charitable towards the poor, and even towards the rich, knowing how to write just sufficiently to sign herself Marguerite, and believing in God, which is science. There are many such virtuous people in this lower world. Some day they will be in the world above. This life has a morrow. At first Fantine had been so ashamed that she had not dared to go out. When she was in the street, she divined that the people turned round behind her and pointed at her. Everyone stared at her and no one greeted her. The cold and bitter scorn of the passers-by penetrated her very flesh and soul like a north wind. It seems as though an unfortunate woman were utterly bare beneath the sarcasm and the curiosities of all in small towns. In Paris, at least, no one knows you, and this obscurity is a garment. Oh, how she would have liked to take herself to Paris! Impossible! She was obliged to accustom herself to disrepute, as she had accustomed herself to indigence. Gradually she decided on her course. At the expiration of 2 or 3 months she took off her shame, and began to go about as though there were nothing the matter. "It is all the same to me," she said. She went and came, bearing her head well up with a bitter smile, and was conscious that she was becoming brazen-faced. Madame Victurnien sometimes saw her passing from her window, noticed the distress of that creature who, thanks to her, had been put back in her proper place, and congratulated herself. The happiness of the evil-minded is black. Excess of toil wore out Fantine, and a little dry cough which troubled her increased. She sometimes said to her neighbor Marguerite, "Just feel how hot my hands are." Nevertheless, when she combed her beautiful hair in the morning with an old broken comb, and it flowed about her like floss silk, she experienced a moment of happy coquetry. Chapter 10. Result of the success. She had been dismissed towards the end of winter. The summer passed, but winter came again. Short days, less work. Winter. No warmth, no light, no noonday, the evening joining on to the morning, fogs, twilight. The window is grey. It is impossible to see clearly at it. The sky is but a vent-hole. The whole day is a cavern. The sun has the air of a beggar. A frightful season. Winter changes the water of heaven and the heart of man into stone. Her creditors harassed her. Fantine earned too little. Her debts had increased. The Thénardiers, who were not promptly paid, wrote to her constantly letters whose contents drove her to despair and whose carriage ruined her. One day they wrote to her that her little Cosette was entirely naked in that cold weather, that she needed a woolen skirt, and that her mother must send at least 10 francs for this. She received the letter and crushed it in her hands all day long. That evening she went into a barber shop at the corner of the street and pulled out her comb. Her admirable golden hair fell to her knees. "What splendid hair!" exclaimed the barber. "How much will you give me for it?" said she. 10 francs. "Cut it off." She purchased a knitted petticoat and sent it to the Thénardiers. This petticoat made the Thénardiers furious. It was the money that they wanted. They gave the petticoat to Éponine. The poor lark continued to shiver. Fantine thought, "My child is no longer cold. I have clothed her with my hair." She put on little round caps which concealed her shorn head, and in which she was still pretty. Dark thoughts held possession of Fantine's heart. When she saw that she could no longer dress her hair, she began to hate everyone about her. She had long shared the universal veneration for Father Madeleine, yet, by dint of repeating to herself that it was he who had discharged her, that he was the cause of her unhappiness, she came to hate him also, and most of all. When she passed the factory in working hours, when the workpeople were at the door, she affected to laugh and sing. An old workwoman who once saw her laughing and singing in this fashion said, "There's a girl who will come to a bad end." She took a lover, the first who offered, a man whom she did not love, out of bravado and with rage in her heart. He was a miserable scamp, a sort of mendicant musician, a lazy beggar, who beat her, and who abandoned her as she had taken him, in disgust. She adored her child. The lower she descended, the darker everything grew about her, the more radiant shone that little angel at the bottom of her heart. She said, "When I get rich I will have my Cosette with me," and she laughed. Her cough did not leave her, and she had sweats on her back. One day she received from the Thénardiers a letter couched in the following terms. "Cosette is ill with a malady which is going rounds of the neighborhood, a miliary fever they call it. Expensive drugs are required. This is ruining us, and we can no longer pay for them. If you do not send us 40 francs before the week is out, the little one will be dead." She burst out laughing and said to her old neighbor, "Ah, they are good! 40 francs? The idea! That makes 2 Napoleons. Where do they think I am to get them? These peasants are stupid, truly." Nevertheless, she went to a dormer window in the staircase and read the letter once more. Then she descended the stairs and emerged, running and leaping and still laughing. Someone met her and said to her, "What makes you so gay?" She replied, "A fine piece of stupidity that some country people have written to me. They demand 40 francs of me. So much for you, you peasants." As she crossed the square, she saw a great many people collected round a carriage of eccentric shape, upon the top of which stood a man dressed in red, who was holding forth. He was a quack dentist on his rounds, who was offering to the public full sets of teeth, opiates, powders, and elixirs. Fantine mingled in the group and began to laugh with the rest of the harangue, which contained slang for the populace and jargon for respectable people. The tooth-puller espied the lovely laughing girl and suddenly exclaimed, "You have beautiful teeth, you girl there who are laughing. If you want to sell me your palates, I will give you a gold Napoleon apiece for them." "What are my palates?" asked Fantine. "The palates," replied the dental professor, "are the front teeth, the 2 upper ones." "How horrible!" exclaimed Fantine. 2 Napoleons, grumbled a toothless old woman who was present. "Here's a lucky girl." Fantine fled and stopped her ears that she might not hear the hoarse voice of the man shouting to her, "Reflect, my beauty! 2 Napoleons! They may prove of service. If your heart bids you, come this evening to the inn of the Lac d'Argent. You will find me there." Fantine returned home. She was furiated and related the occurrence to her good neighbor Marguerite. "Can you understand such a thing? Is he not an abominable man? How can they allow such people to go about the country? Pull out my 2 front teeth? Why, I should be horrible. My hair will grow again, but my teeth? Ah, what a monster of a man! I should prefer to throw myself head first on the pavement from the 5th story." "He told me that he should be at the Lac d'Argent this evening." "And what did he offer?" asked Marguerite. 2 Napoleons." "That makes 40 francs. "Yes," said Fantine, "that makes 40 francs." She remained thoughtful and began her work. At the expiration of a quarter of an hour she left her sewing and went to read the Thénardiers' letter once more on the staircase. On her return she said to Marguerite, who was at work beside her, "What is the miliary fever? Do you know?" "Yes," answered the old spinster. "It is a disease." "Does it require many drugs?" "Oh, terrible drugs." "How does one get it?" "It is a malady that one gets without knowing how." "Then it attacks children?" "Children in particular." "Do people die of it?" "They may," said Marguerite. Fantine left the room and went to read her letter once more on the staircase. That evening she went out, and was seen to turn her steps in the direction of the Rue de Paris, where the inns are situated. The next morning, when Marguerite entered Fantine's room before daylight, for they always worked together, and in this manner used only one candle for the 2, she found Fantine seated on her bed, pale and frozen. She had not lain down. Her cap had fallen on her knees. Her candle had burned all night, and was almost entirely consumed. Marguerite halted on the threshold, petrified at this tremendous wastefulness, and exclaimed, "Lord, the candle is all burned out! Something has happened!" Then she looked at Fantine, who turned toward her, her head bereft of its hair. Fantine had grown 10 years older since the preceding night. "Jesus!" said Marguerite. "What is the matter with you, Fantine?" "Nothing," replied Fantine. "Quite the contrary. My child will not die of that frightful malady for lack of succor. I am content." So saying, she pointed out to the spinster 2 Napoleons which were glittering on the table. "Oh, Jesus God!" cried Marguerite. "Why, it is a fortune! Where did you get those louis d'or?" "I got them," replied Fantine. At the same time she smiled. The candle illuminated her countenance. It was a bloody smile. A reddish saliva soiled the corners of her lips, and she had a black hole in her mouth. The 2 teeth had been extracted. She sent the 40 francs to Montfermeil. After all, it was a ruse of the Thénardiers to obtain money. Cosette was not ill. Fantine threw her mirror out the window. She had long since quitted her cell on the 2nd floor for an attic with only a latch to fasten it, next the roof. One of those attics whose extremity forms an angle with the floor, and knocks you on the head every instant. The poor occupant can reach the end of his chamber as he can the end of his destiny, only by bending over more and more. She had no longer a bed. A rag which she called her coverlay, a mattress on the floor, and a seatless chair still remained. A little rosebush which she had dried up, forgotten, in one corner. In the other corner was a butter pot to hold water, which froze in winter, and in which the various levels of the water remained long marked by these circles of ice. She had lost her shame. She lost her coquetry. A final sign. She went out with dirty caps. Whether from lack of time or from indifference, she no longer mended her linen. As the heels wore out, she dragged her stockings down into her shoes. This was evident from the perpendicular wrinkles. She patched her bodice, which was old and worn out, with scraps of calico, which tore at the slightest movement. The people to whom she was indebted made scenes, and gave her no peace. She found them in the street. She found them again on her staircase. She passed many a night weeping and thinking. Her eyes were very bright, and she felt a steady pain in her shoulder towards the top of the left shoulder blade. She coughed a great deal. She deeply hated Father Madeleine, but made no complaint. She sewed 17 hours a day, but a contractor for the work of prisons, who made the prisoners work at a discount, suddenly made prices fall, which reduced the daily earnings of working women to 9 sous. 17 hours of toil, and 9 sous a day. Her creditors were more pitiless than ever. The second-hand dealer, who had taken back nearly all his furniture, said to her incessantly, "When will you pay me, you hussy?" What did they want of her, good God? She felt that she was being hunted, and something of the wild beast developed in her. About the same time, Thénardier wrote to her that he had waited with decidedly too much amiability, and that he must have 100 francs at once. Otherwise, he would turn little Cosette out of doors, convalescent as she was from her heavy illnesses, into the cold and the streets, and that she might do what she liked with herself, and die if she chose. 100 francs, thought Fantine. But in what trade can one earn 100 sous a day? "Come," said she, "let us sell what is left." The unfortunate girl became a woman of the town. Chapter 11. Christus nos liberavit. What is the history of Fantine? It is society purchasing a slave. From whom? From misery. From hunger, cold, isolation, destitution, a dolorous bargain. A soul for a morsel of bread. Misery offers, society accepts. The sacred law of Jesus Christ governs our civilization, but it does not, as yet, permeate it. It is said that slavery has disappeared from European civilization. This is a mistake. It still exists, but it weighs only upon the women, and it is called prostitution. It weighs upon the woman, that is to say, upon grace, weakness, beauty, maternity. This is not one of the least of man's disgraces. At the point in which this melancholy drama which we have now reached, nothing is left to Fantine of that which she had formerly been. She has become marble in becoming mire. Whoever touches her feels cold. She passes, she endures you, she ignores you. She is the severe and dishonored figure. Life and the social order have said their last word for her. All has happened to her that will happen to her. She has felt everything, borne everything, experienced everything, suffered everything, lost everything, mourned everything. She is resigned, with that resignation which resembles indifference, as death resembles sleep. She no longer avoids anything. Let all the clouds fall upon her, and all the ocean sweep over her. What matters it to her? She is a sponge that is soaked. At least she believes it to be so, but it is an error to imagine that fate can be exhausted, and that one has reached the bottom of anything whatever. Alas! What are these fates driven on pell-mell? Whither are they going? Why are they thus? He who knows that sees the whole of the shadow. He is alone. His name is God. Chapter 12. Monsieur Bamatabois' inactivity. there is in all small towns, and there was at Montreuil-sur-Mer in particular, a class of young men who nibble away an income of 1,500 francs with the same air with which their prototypes devour 200,000 francs a year in Paris. These are beings of the great neuter species, impotent men, parasites, ciphers, who have a little land, a little folly, a little wit, who would be rustics in a drawing-room, who think themselves gentlemen in the dram-shop, who say, my friends, my peasants, my woods, who hiss actresses at the theatre to prove that they are of taste, quarrel with the officers of the garrison to prove that they are men of war, hunt, smoke, yawn, drink, smell of tobacco, play billiards, stare at travellers as they descend from the diligence, live at the café, dine at the inn, have a dog which eats the bones under the table, and a mistress who eats the dishes on the table, who stick at a sou, exaggerate the fashions, admire tragedy, despise women, wear out their old boots, copy London through Paris, and Paris through the medium of Pont-à-Mousson, grow as dullards, never work, serve no use, and do no great harm. Monsieur Felix Ptolemy, had he remained in his own province and never beheld Paris, would have been one of these men. If they were richer, one would say they are dandies. If they were poorer, one would say they are idlers. They are simply men without employment. Among these unemployed are bores, the bored, dreamers, and some knaves. At that period, a dandy was composed of a tall collar, a big cravat, a watch with trinkets, 3 vests of different colors worn one on top of the other, the red and blue insides, of a short-waisted olive coat with a codfish tail, a double row of silver buttons set close to each other and running up to the shoulder, and a pair of trousers of a lighter shade of olive, ornamented on the seams with an indefinite but always uneven number of lines, varying from 1 to 11, a limit which was never exceeded. Add to this high shoes with little irons on the heels, a tall hat with a narrow brim, hair worn in a tuft, an enormous cane, and conversation set off by puns of Potier. Above all, spurs and a moustache. At that epoch, moustaches indicated the bourgeois, and spurs the pedestrian. The provincial dandy wore the longest of spurs and the fiercest of moustaches. It was the period of the conflict of the republics of South America with the King of Spain, of Bolivar against Murillo. Now, narrow-brimmed hats were royalist and were called Murillos. Liberals wore hats with wide brims, which were called Bolivars. 8 or 10 months then, after that which is related in the preceding pages, towards the 1st of January 1823, on a snowy evening, one of these dandies, one of these unemployed, a right thinker, for he wore a Murillo, and was, moreover, warmly enveloped in one of those large cloaks which completed the fashionable costume in cold weather, was amusing himself by tormenting a creature who was prowling about in a ball dress, with neck uncovered and flowers in her hair, in front of the officers' café. This dandy was smoking, for he was decidedly fashionable. Each time that the woman passed in front of him, he bestowed on her, together with a puff from his cigar, some apostrophe which he considered witty and mirthful, such as, "How ugly you are! Will you get out of my sight? You have no teeth." This gentleman was known as Monsieur Bamatabois. The woman, a melancholy decorated sceptre, which went and came through the snow, made him no reply, did not even glance at him, and nevertheless continued her promenade in silence, and with a sombre regularity, which brought her every 5 minutes within reach of this sarcasm, like the condemned soldier who returns under the rods. The small effect which she produced no doubt piqued the lounger, and taking advantage of a moment when her back was turned, he crept up behind her with the gait of a wolf, and stifling his laugh, bent down, picked up a handful of snow from the pavement, and thrust it abruptly into her back, between her bare shoulders. The woman uttered a roar, whirled round, and gave a leap like a panther, and hurled herself upon the man, burying her nails in his face, with the most frightful words which could fall from the guard-room into the gutter. These insults, which poured forth in a voice roughened by brandy, did, indeed, proceed in hideous wise from a mouth which lacked its 2 front teeth. It was Fantine. At the noise thus produced, the officers ran out in throngs from the café, passers-by collected. At a large and merry circle, hooting and applauding, was formed around this whirlwind, composed of 2 beings, whom there was some difficulty in recognizing as a man and a woman. The man, struggling, his hat on the ground, the woman striking out with feet and fists, bareheaded, howling, minus hair and teeth, livid with wrath. Horrible. Suddenly, a man of lofty stature emerged vivaciously from the crowd, seized the woman by her satin bodice, which was covered with mud, and said to her, "Follow me." The woman raised her head. Her furious voice suddenly died away. Her eyes were glassy, she turned pale instead of livid, and she trembled with a quiver of terror. She had recognized Javert. The dandy took his advantage of the incident to make his escape. Chapter 13. The solution of some questions connected with the municipal police. Javert thrust aside the spectators, broke the circle, and set out with long strides towards the police station, which is situated at the extremity of the square, dragging the wretched woman after him. She yielded mechanically. Neither he nor she uttered a word. The cloud of spectators followed, jesting, in a paroxysm of delight. Supreme misery and occasion for obscenity. Arriving at the police station, which was a low room warmed by a stove, with a glazed and grated door opening on the street and guarded by a detachment, Javert opened the door, entered with Fantine, and shut the door behind him, to the great disappointment of the curious, who raised themselves on tiptoe and craned their neck in front of the thick glass of the station-house in an effort to see. Curiosity is a sort of gluttony. To see is to devour. On entering, Fantine fell down in a corner, motionless and mute, crouching down like a terrified dog. The sergeant of the guard brought a lighted candle to the table. Javert seated himself, drew a sheet of stamped paper from his pocket, and began to write. This class of women is consigned by our laws entirely to the discretion of the police. The latter do what they please, punish them, as seems good to them, and confiscate at their will those two sorry things which they entitle their industry and their liberty. Javert was impassive. His grave face betrayed no emotion whatever. Nevertheless, he was seriously and deeply preoccupied. It was one of those moments when he was exercising, without control, but subject to all scruples of a severe conscience, his redoubtable discretionary power. At that moment he was conscious that his police agent's stool was a tribunal. He was entering judgment. He judged and condemned. He summoned all the ideas which could possibly exist in his mind around the great thing which he was doing. The more he examined the deed of this woman, the more shocked he felt. It was evident that he had just witnessed the commission of a crime. He had just beheld, yonder in the street, society, in the person of a freeholder and an elector, insulted and attacked by a creature who was outside all pales. A prostitute had made an attempt on the life of a citizen. He had seen that. He, Javert. He wrote in silence. When he had finished, he signed the paper, folded it, and said to the sergeant of the guard as he handed it to him, "Take 3 men and conduct this creature to jail." Then, turning to Fantine, "You are to have 6 months of it." The unhappy woman shuddered. 6 months? 6 months of prison? She exclaimed, 6 months in which to earn 7 sous a day? But what will become of Cosette? My daughter, my daughter! But I still owe the Thénardiers over 100 francs. Do you know that, Monsieur Inspector? She dragged herself across the damp floor, among the muddy boots of all those men, without rising, with clasped hands, and taking great strides on her knees. "Monsieur Javert," said she, "I beseech your mercy. I assure you that I was not in the wrong. If you had seen the beginning, you would have seen. I swear to you by the good God that I was not to blame. That gentleman, the bourgeois whom I do not know, put snow down my back. Has anyone the right to put snow down our backs when we are walking along peaceably and doing no harm to anyone? I am rather ill, you see, and then he had been saying impertinent things to me for a long time. You are ugly, you have no teeth. I know well that I no longer have those teeth. I did nothing. I said to myself, the gentleman is amusing himself. I was honest with him. I did not speak to him. It was at that moment that he put the snow down my back. Monsieur Javert, good Monsieur Inspector, is there not some person here who saw it and can tell you that it is quite true? Perhaps I did wrong to get angry. You know that one is not master of oneself at the first moment. One gives way to vivacity, and then, when someone puts something cold down your back just when you are not expecting it. I did wrong to spoil that gentleman's hat. Why did he go away? I would ask his pardon. Oh my God, it makes no difference to me whether I ask his pardon. Do me the favor today, for this once, Monsieur Javert. Hold! You do not know that in prison one can only earn 7 sous a day. It is not the government's fault, but 7 sous is one's earnings. And just fancy, I must pay 100 francs or my little girl will be sent to me. Oh my God, I cannot have her with me. What I do is so vile. Oh, my Cosette, my little angel of the Holy Virgin. What will become of her, poor creature? I will tell you, it is the Thénardiers, innkeepers, peasants, and such people are unreasonable. They want money. Don't put me in prison. You see, there is a little girl who will be turned out into the street to get along as best she may in the very heart of winter, and you must have pity on such a being, my good Monsieur Javert. If she were older, she might earn her living, but it cannot be done at that age. I am not a bad woman at bottom. It is not cowardliness and gluttony that have made me what I am. If I have drunk brandy, it was only out of misery. I do not love it, but it benumbs the senses. When I was happy, it was only necessary to glance into my closets, and it would have been evident that I was not a coquettish and untidy woman. I had linen, a great deal of linen. Have pity on me, Monsieur Javert. She spoke thus, rent in twain, shaken with sobs, blinded with tears, her neck bare, wringing her hands, and coughing with a dry, short cough, stammering softly with a voice of agony. Great sorrow is a divine and terrible ray which transfigures the unhappy. At that moment Fantine had become beautiful once more. From time to time she paused, and tenderly kissed the police agent's coat. She would have softened a heart of granite, but a heart of wood cannot be softened. "Come," said Javert, "I have heard you out. Have you entirely finished? You will get 6 months. Now march. The Eternal Father in person could do nothing more." At these solemn words, "the Eternal Father in person could do nothing more," she understood that her fate was sealed. She sank down, murmuring, "Mercy!" Javert turned his back. The soldier seized her by the arms. A few moments earlier a man had entered, but no one had paid any heed to him. He shut the door, leaned his back against it, and listened to Fantine's despairing supplications. At the instant when the soldiers laid their hands upon the unfortunate woman, who would not rise, he emerged from the shadow and said, "1 moment, if you please." Javert raised his eyes and recognized Monsieur Madeleine. He removed his hat, and saluting him with a sort of aggrieved awkwardness, "Excuse me, Monsieur Mayor." The words Monsieur Mayor produced a curious effect upon Fantine. She rose to her feet with one bound, like a spectre springing from the earth, thrust aside the soldiers with both arms, walked straight up to Monsieur Madeleine before anyone could prevent her, and gazing attentively at him with a bewildered air, she cried, "Ah, so it is you who are Monsieur le Maire!" Then she burst into a laugh, and spit in his face. Monsieur Madeleine wiped his face and said, "Inspector Javert, set this woman at liberty." Javert felt that he was on the verge of going mad. He experienced at that moment blow upon blow, and almost simultaneously, the most violent emotions which he had ever undergone in all his life. To see a woman of the town spit in the mayor's face was a thing so monstrous that, in his most daring flights of fancy, he would have regarded it as a sacrilege to believe it possible. On the other hand, at the very bottom of his thought, he made a hideous comparison as to what this woman was, and as to what this mayor might be. Then he, with horror, caught a glimpse of I know not what simple explanation of this prodigious attack. But when he beheld that mayor, that magistrate, calmly wipe his face and say, "Set this woman at liberty," he underwent a sort of intoxication of amazement. Thought and word failed him equally. The sum total of possible astonishment had been exceeded in his case. He remained mute. The words produced no less strange an effect on Fantine. She raised her bare arm and clung to the damper of the stove, like a person who is reeling. Nevertheless, she glanced about her, and began to speak in a low voice, as though talking to herself. "At liberty? I am to be allowed to go? I am not to go to prison for 6 months? Who said that? It is not possible that anyone could have said that. I did not hear aright. It cannot have been that monster of a mayor. Was it you, my good Monsieur Javert, who said that I am to be set free? Oh, see here, I will tell you about it, and you will let me go. That monster of a mayor, that old blackguard of a mayor is the cause of it all. Just imagine, Monsieur Javert, he turned me out, all because of a pack of rascally women who gossip in the workroom. If that is not a horror, what is? To dismiss a poor girl who was doing her work honestly? Then I could no longer earn enough, and all this misery followed. In the first place, there is one improvement which these gentlemen of the police ought to make, and that is to prevent prison contractors from wronging poor people. I will explain it to you. You see, you are earning 12 sous at shirt-making, the price falls to 9 sous, and it is not enough to live on. Then one has to become whatever one can. As for me, I had my little Cosette, and I was actually forced to become a bad woman. Now you understand how it is that that blackguard of a mayor caused all this mischief. After I was stamped on that gentleman's hat in front of the officers' café, but he spoiled my whole dress with snow. We women have but one silk dress for evening wear. You see that I did not do wrong deliberately. Truly, Monsieur Javert, and everywhere I behold women who are far more wicked than I, and who are much happier. Oh, Monsieur Javert, it was you who gave the orders that I am to be set free, was it not? Make inquiries, speak to my landlord. I am paying my rent now. They will tell you that I am perfectly honest. Oh, my God, I beg your pardon. I have unintentionally touched the damper of the stove, and it has made it smoke. Monsieur Madeleine listened to her with profound attention. While she was speaking, he fumbled in his waistcoat, drew out his purse, and opened it. It was empty. He put it back in his pocket. He said to Fantine, "How much did you say that you owed?" Fantine, who was looking at Javert only, turned towards him. "Was I speaking to you?" Then, addressing the soldiers, "Say, you fellows, did you see how I spit in his face? Ah, you old wretch of a mayor, you came here to frighten me, but I'm not afraid of you. I am afraid of Monsieur Javert. I am afraid of my good Monsieur Javert." So saying, she turned to the inspector again. "And yet you see, Monsieur Inspector, it is necessary to be just. I understand that you are just, Monsieur Inspector. In fact, it is perfectly simple. A man amuses himself by putting snow down a woman's back, and that makes the officers laugh. One must divert themselves in some way, and we are here to amuse themselves with, of course. And then you come, you are certainly obliged to preserve order. You lead off the woman who is in the wrong, but on reflection, since you are a good man, you say that I am to be set at liberty, for it is the sake of the little one. For 6 months in prison would prevent my supporting my child. Only don't do it again, you hussy. Oh, I won't do it again, Monsieur Javert. They may do whatever they please to me now, I will not stir. But today, you see, I cried because it hurt me. I was not expecting that snow from the gentleman and all, and then, as I told you, I am not well. I have a cough. I seem to have a burning ball in my stomach, and the doctor tells me, take care of yourself. Here, feel, give me your hand, don't be afraid, it is here." She no longer wept. Her voice was caressing. She placed Javert's coarse hand on her delicate white throat and looked smilingly at him. All at once she rapidly adjusted her disordered garments, dropped the fold of her skirt which had been pushed up as she dragged herself along, almost to the height of her knee, and stepped towards the door, saying to the soldiers in a low voice, with a friendly nod, "Children, Monsieur the Inspector said that I am to be released, and I am going." She laid her hand on the latch of the door. One step more and she would be in the street. Javert, up to that moment, had remained erect, motionless, with his eyes fixed on the ground, cast athwart the scene like some displaced statue, which is waiting to be put away somewhere. The sound of the latch roused him. He raised his hand with an expression of sovereign authority, an expression all the more alarming in proportion as the authority rests on a low level, ferocious in the wild beast, atrocious in the man of no estate. "Sergeant," he cried, "don't you see that that jade is walking off? Who bade you let her go?" "I," said Madeleine. Fantine trembled at the sound of Javert's voice, and let go the latch, as a thief relinquishes the article which he has stolen. At the sound of Madeleine's voice she turned around, and from that moment forth she uttered no word, nor dared so much as breathe freely, but her glance strayed from Madeleine to Javert, and from Javert to Madeleine in turn, according to which was speaking. It was evident that Javert must have been exasperated beyond measure before he would permit himself to apostrophize the sergeant as he had done, after the mayor's suggestion that Fantine should be set at liberty. Had he reached the point of forgetting the mayor's presence? Had he finally declared to himself that it was impossible that any authority should have given such an order, and that the mayor must certainly have said one thing by mistake for another without intending it? Or, in view of the enormities of which he had been a witness for the past 2 hours, did he say to himself that it was necessary to recur to supreme resolutions, that it was indispensable that the small should be made great, that the police spy should transform himself into a magistrate, that the policeman should become the dispenser of justice, and that, in this prodigious extremity, order, law, morality, government, society in its entirety, was personified in him, Javert? However that may be, when Monsieur Madeleine uttered the word "I," as we have just heard, Police Inspector Javert was seen to turn towards the mayor, pale, cold, with blue lips and a look of despair, his whole body agitated by an imperceptible quiver and an unprecedented occurrence, and say to him, with downcast eyes but a firm voice, "Monsieur Mayor, that cannot be." "Why not?" said Monsieur Madeleine. "This miserable woman has insulted a citizen." "Inspector Javert," replied the mayor in a calm and conciliating tone, "listen. You are an honest man, and I feel no hesitation in explaining matters to you. Here is the true state of the case. I was passing through the square just as you were leading this woman away. There were still groups of people standing about, and I made inquiries and learned everything. It was the townsman who was in the wrong, and who should have been arrested by properly conducted police." Javert retorted, "This wretch has just insulted Monsieur le Maire." "That concerns me," said Monsieur Madeleine. "My own insult belongs to me, I think. I can do what I please about it." "I beg Monsieur le Maire's pardon. The insult is not to him, but to the law." "Inspector Javert," replied Monsieur Madeleine, "the highest law is conscience. I have heard this woman. I know what I am doing." "And I, Monsieur Maire, do not know what I see." "Then content yourself with obeying." "I am obeying my duty. My duty demands that this woman shall serve 6 months in prison." Monsieur Madeleine replied gently, "Heed this well. She will not serve a single day." At this decisive word, Javert ventured to fix a searching look on the mayor, and to say, but in a tone of voice that was still profoundly respectful, "I am sorry to oppose Monsieur le Maire. It is for the first time in my life, but he will permit me to remark that I am within the bounds of my authority. I confine myself, since Monsieur le Maire desires it, to the question of the gentleman. I was present. This woman flung herself on Monsieur Bamatabois, who is an elector and the proprietor of that handsome house with a balcony, which forms the corner of the esplanade, 3 stories high and entirely cut of stone. Such things as there are in the world. In any case, Monsieur le Maire, this is a question of police regulations in the street, and concerns me. I shall detain this woman Fantine." Then Monsieur Madeleine folded his arms, and said in a severe voice, which no one in the town had heard hitherto, "The matter to which you refer is one connected with the municipal police. According to the terms of Article 9, 11, 15, and 66 of the Code of Criminal Examination, I am the judge. I order that this woman shall be set at liberty." Javert ventured to make a final effort. "But, Monsieur Maire—" "I refer you to Article 81 of the law of the 13th of December, 1799, in regard to arbitrary detention. Monsieur le Maire, permit me—" "Not another word. But—" "Leave the room," said Monsieur Madeleine. Javert received the blow erect, full in the face, in his breast, like a Russian soldier. He bowed to the very earth before the mayor, and left the room. Fantine stood aside from the door and stared at him in amazement as he had passed. Nevertheless, she was also prey to a strange confusion. She had just seen herself a subject of dispute between 2 opposing powers. She had seen 2 men who held in their hands her liberty, her life, her soul, her child, in combat before her very eyes. One of these men was drawing her towards darkness, the other was leading her back towards the light. In this conflict, viewed through the exaggerations of terror, these 2 men had appeared to her like 2 giants. The one spoke like her demon, the other like her good angel. The angel had conquered the demon, and, strange to say, that which made her shudder from head to foot was the fact that this angel, this liberator, was the very man whom she abhorred, that mayor whom she had so long regarded as the author of all her woes, that Madeleine. And at that very moment when she had insulted him in so hideous a fashion, he had saved her. Had she then been mistaken? Must she change her whole soul? She did not know. She trembled. She listened in bewilderment. She looked on in affright, and at every word uttered by Monsieur Madeleine she felt the frightful shades of hatred crumble and melt within her, and something warm and ineffable, indescribable, which was both joy, confidence, and love, dawn in her heart. When Javert had taken his departure, Monsieur Madeleine turned to her, and said to her in a deliberate voice, like a serious man who does not wish to weep, and who finds some difficulty in speaking, "I have heard you. I knew nothing about what you have mentioned. I believe that it is true, and I feel that it is true. I was even ignorant of the fact that you had left my shop. Why did you not apply to me? But here, I will pay your debts. I will send for your child, or you shall go to her. You shall live here, in Paris, or where you please. I undertake the care of your child and yourself. You shall not work any longer if you do not like. I will give all the money you require. You shall be honest and happy once more. And listen, I declare to you that if all is as you say, and I do not doubt it, you have never ceased to be virtuous and holy in the sight of God. Oh, poor woman!" This was more than Fantine could bear. To have Cosette, to leave this life of infamy, to live free, rich, happy, respectable with Cosette, to see all these realities of paradise blossom of a sudden in the midst of her misery. She stared stupidly at this man who was talking to her, and could only give vent to 2 or 3 sobs. Her limbs gave way beneath her. She knelt in front of Monsieur Madeleine, and before he could prevent her, he felt her grasp his hand and press her lips to it. Then she fainted.